From religion to wrestling, gumbo to grits, politics to poetry, and all things Southern in between, this is Take on the South. Produced by the Institute for Southern Studies and hosted by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of South Carolina, Take on the South examines the highs and lows of the American South, examines the truths and fictions of the country's most distinctive region, and picks the brains of some of its most accomplished students. To understand the South, you need to take it on, and that's what we'll be doing. Join us as we take on the South.
Welcome to Take on the South, the podcast of the Institute for Southern Studies at the University of South Carolina. I'm Matt Simmons, the Senior Instructor and Assistant Director here in the Institute. I'll be your host today. Today is the day of our third annual NIFR Lecture in Southern Literature, and our honoree today, I'm pleased, is Jill McCorkle. Jill McCorkle is the author of, we just counted before we started recording, 12 works of fiction, 5 short story collections, and 7 novels. And we are so glad to have her here today with us. We just had lunch and we talked about a lot of stuff, and I said, I'm going to have to hold on to some of those questions because I want to be sure we can get them in the interview, right? So if, humor me if you have to repeat some things. We've already said over our meal.
And same.
Very, very good. All right, well, Jill, I'm so glad to have you here today. Let's just start out with just what your background is. I know you're from Lumberton, North Carolina, so what was your background? What was growing up in Lumberton like? And then kind of what was your journey to becoming a writer?
Yeah, I always say it's growing up in a small town is like a great gift to a writer because it really was a kind of microcosm of the larger world. And the older I have gotten over the years, the more I recognize about that little microcosm, things I didn't necessarily know or understand. But in my childhood, I knew so many people, and so much was familiar. My parents had grown up there. 2 of my grandparents had grown up there. So the whole town was like a series of overlays, because I knew it through my eyes, but my parents would say, well, that's where the fair used to be, the big field for the fair, and this used to be here. And my grandmother did the same. And so it was just a real gift to have these layers of a kind of history of the place.
Do those layers in history of place, there's 100 different things that could have made you want to become a writer, but I can't help but having read a significant portion of your work, not all 12 books by any means, but having read a significant portion of your work, there seems to be a lot that is about kind of unearthing these stories of place and these overlying places that are there, and these not actually knowing a place as well as one thinks you might, and wanting to explore that more. Is that part of what went into your vision as a writer, as an artist?
Well, I think I could not have put it into words at the time, but I do think that's the ongoing push of my work, is trying to reach and understand those places of the unknown, and what gets lost to time. But as a kid, I just loved to write the same way I roller skated or did anything else. I think that early realization that I could be in a room all by myself and make myself laugh or cry or frighten myself was really powerful. And so then with that, it became my desire to have that effect on others. So as a kid, I wrote a lot of really bad poetry, sort of designed to either make people laugh or make people cry. And so that was, my earliest memory of writing is, at around age 7.
Yeah, no, you're reminding me, you'll perhaps give me a preview of my daughter's future life now. Of course, this is the thing she does. She sits in her room and reads Kate DiCamillo novels and turns around and writes and writes poetry and her own little elaborate stories and draws her own comic books and everything. So I think, maybe I'm seeing a preview of her future life there.
It's powerful,
Sure.
and I think it's great for kids to have that inner life
Yes.
early.
Yes. So you went to Chapel Hill, right?
Mm-hmm.
What did you study at Chapel Hill?
Well, I thought I was, for a while, I actually thought I was going to be a phys ed major. And I wanted to do like recreational therapy.
Okay.
And then I was not the most academic student, but I saw
I'm a professor now, and neither was I. And so this is, my students say, wait a minute, you flunked out of college? I'm like, yeah, I flunked out of college. So.
In drop ad, back when everything was like just cards, paper cards you had to pick up in a big hot gymnasium.
Sure.
And I saw a table, and it said creative writing. I'm like,
how about that?
whoa, you mean that's a class? Because I was still writing all the time.
Yeah.
And so I took what I thought would be a slide. And it was not a slide. And what's more, it became my whole focus.
Absolutely.
And with that, I got a little tired of what looked like a lot of days running back and forth from a gymnasium with wet hair, and I became an English major.
Well, how about that? And so then fast forward, a little while later, and you and I were talking at lunch. It's just about 40 years ago that you published 2 novels, right?
Yeah.
And
40 years this fall.
40 years this fall. And there's almost this kind of legendary sort of quality in people that have studied contemporary Southern literature, in that you're the one who publishes 2 novels, 2 fantastic novels on the same day, for all intents and purposes. How did that happen? How did you end up with basically 2 novels happening simultaneously?
I was very, very lucky. Wonderful Lewis Rubin Jr., his picture here in your hallway.
Lewis Rubin Jr., for those of y'all who are listening who do not know who he is, this man is one of the greatest scholars of Southern literature,
Yes.
is really, really influential in the study of the literature of the South, and was a professor at Chapel Hill for, my goodness, 40-odd years?
And Hollins College prior to that.
Oh, yeah,
He
yeah.
started the writing program there, and he was at Hopkins, I think, before that. But he had been my teacher.
Okay.
And I was in his honors writing workshop my senior year, and he just continued very generously to read whatever I sent him.
Okay.
And so when I sent him my first novel, he said, I have this idea, I might want to start a publishing house. And I'd love to have this novel, but it would probably be 2 years.
Okay.
And at the time, I had gotten an agent, but she even said, I can probably, find a home for you. But what I may not be able to find is an editor as devoted as Lewis Rubin. And so it was all sort of a gamble. And so I signed on to Algonquin, and then out of sheer nervousness, compulsively started the next novel, which is what I do when I don't know what else to do, and finished it. It wrote very quickly, and showed that to him, and he and Shannon Ravenel, another South Carolinian,
Indeed.
of note,
As Rubin was from
yes,
Charleston.
Yes, they decided they would bring them out together instead
Fantastic.
of choosing, and. So I was very lucky. It was terrifying at the time, but lucky in that people were interested that Lewis was starting his own publishing house, sort of out of the blue. And it was, people referred to Algonquin kind of as the little engine that could. And then it also gave reviewers 2 books to compare.
Oh, sure.
So it worked in my favor.
Sure.
I was very lucky, in the right place at the right time.
Sure. Well, you and I were talking at lunch about this. So that was about 40 years ago this fall. So
Yeah.
that happened back in the early 80s. And so here we are now, 40 years on. You've got 10 more published works under your belt. Just had a new one come out, 6-9 months ago, something like that, end of last year, beginning of this year.
Yes.
And you were mentioning that you've noticed when you go back and look at your early works, he's like, oh yeah, I remember that woman who wrote that, right? And how she seems familiar and also like, but I would never say that now, right? Mm-hmm. So as an artist with such a long, extensive career, this is maybe a strange question to ask, but are you self-conscious of your work changing, evolving? Are you still comfortable with what your work was? How do you sort of relate to? Do you look at things you did back 40 years ago? You look at the cheerleader and you go, I wish I would not have written that sentence in that way.
Well, you look back and you sort of know you would do it differently now. Sure. But it's where I was at the time, and I sort of like the way that the books serve almost as kind of time capsule. Mm-hmm. I'm very interested in contemporary culture, always have been, sure. And what's happening. And so it's really hard for me, for whatever's happening in the world, not to bleed onto the pages.
Absolutely.
And so oftentimes that is in the backdrop.
Sure.
Of whatever a character is
is
going through. So I decided long ago, it is what it is, you let it go and keep moving forward. And my work has changed quite a bit in different ways, and it is more of what I have always aspired to, I think.
Okay.
Not to take away from earlier work.
And when you say it's what you've always aspired to, you're finally achieving that. What are you achieving now that you're so proud of?
Well, I think I think I have more confidence as a writer. I think I learned early in my career that I could be funny. Yes. I'm going to talk with you about it in a little bit, because there's some things you do that. So and I love humor, and I love playing around with it, but I never wanted the humor to eclipse whatever is the more serious line of the story on the page. And so I think over time, maybe the work is not as funny as it once was. The humor is still there.
Yes.
But I've had people recently say to me, "You're just not as funny as you used to be." And so that's a change. But I think I'm that person. I go in a hotel room and the first thing I do is look behind the shower curtain, because I watched Psycho too many times as a kid. Yeah. And because I want to see it before it sees me. Yeah. And on the page I use that as a comparison, because I think I've gotten braver about really moving into those darker places in a character's life or a situation. And fine-tuning the kind of humor that still can be inserted with that. That's an ongoing challenge and something I really work hard to do.
Sure. I mean, this thing you just said, talking about, looking behind the shower curtain in the hotel, see it before it sees me. I mean, I'm thinking about some of your stories now, and I think there is kind of this desire on the part of some of your characters, this sort of regret that maybe they didn't see it before it saw them, right?
That's right.
I'm thinking about this one story in particular, the name of which I can't remember. It's in Final Vinyl Days. It's set in Boston, right? And we'll talk about that in a minute. Uh-huh. And it's about there's this mother, and there's this old man who's kind of there by himself. And so if you remember that story, there's this context in that the
life pre-recorded.
Yes, life pre-recorded, exactly. Where the main character there, she constantly is it's like she's trying to understand this life she has, this life the old man has, this kind of parallels there. It's as if and when the old man is near the end of his life, it's like now she's starting to finally understand what he had to reveal to her, what she has, and there's this revelation that she has near the end about the nature of motherhood and all these things going on there as well. And I really feel like now I think this is an apt way to explain a lot of what's happening in your work. Talking about that story and some other things as well. These characters want to see something before it sees them, and yet so often they fail to do that. And it's only after they've been seen that then they can tell what has seen them, right?
Yeah.
That's rather impressive. Well, let's talk about Boston then. So you're in Boston for, what'd you say, about 20
Almost
years?
20 years.
20
yeah.
years. 20 years. And you and I were chatting at lunch about this as well, in that you are a Southerner, you're from Lumberton, and you're proud of this fact. You're not ashamed of this fact. And yet you also express some frustration about your work always being sort of pigeonholed as Southern writing, because your work is also trying to explore another place as well, right? Other places, but you have many stories set, there, a significant amount of work set in the greater Boston area, right? Set in other parts of the world. And this led to you and me talking as well about how you're leaving North Carolina, going to Massachusetts, really kind of helps you to understand North Carolina and see it more clearly. Could maybe you speak some about like how you were able to see it more clearly, why you were able to see it more clearly after living in Massachusetts those 20-odd years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as simple as sitting down to work, and what was coming to my mind was the southern landscape.
Sure.
Rather than looking out the window where I was, it was so vivid in my mind.
Because the Back Bay looks nothing like, the Pine Barrens of eastern North Carolina, does it?
No, and I realized, though, that my sense of the foliage, the food, the light, there were things that I had taken for granted that just sharpened our beautiful coastline.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which we do share with you all.
Yes. Well, I mean, remember, I'm from East North Carolina too,
I know. But
I'm closer to the coast than you're from originally.
The Carolina coast.
Sure, exactly.
Is so beautiful, and I think I just grew up taking that for granted.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about the coast then. Let's talk about Fulton, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. This wonderful little imaginative place that you've made up that you've admitted more or less to me is Lumberton, but you also keep moving it around, right?
Yes. Well, it looks like Lumberton looked in the 60s and 70s.
Got it.
And I took the liberty of moving it closer to the coast, so it is more like Whiteville.
Which is where I'm from, exactly. But in this novel, Carolina Moon, which is one of your best-known works, and I want to talk specifically about that novel because I was mentioning this in my truck on the way back here to campus. So to tell the whole story, when I was, it's 2002, 2003. I'm at North Carolina State, same time you're there, right? I'm never fortunate enough to have a class with you. And now I'm regretting it. Wish I could go back 20 years ago and have rectified that, but I'm in Quail Ridge Books, if you remember Quail Ridge Books in Raleigh.
Very well.
I'm in Quail Ridge Books one day, and I'm just walking around, and I see the very sort of striking paperback cover of Carolina Moon, right? Mm-hmm. And my eye catches me, and I look at it, and I flip it over, and I look, and I say, I'm going to buy this for my mama for Christmas. Because my mama was a big reader. She really enjoyed, she was a woman who always said, I'm not very educated, I don't know very much, but I enjoy reading stories, right? So I always tried to find her good things to read. So I bought this for her, and I gave it to her for Christmas that year. And then a few months later, I'm at home, and I sit on her coffee table, and I said, hey, Mama, did you read this? Did you like it? And she said, oh, baby, that novel just understood me. That novel just understood me.
That's so nice.
And so then I said, okay. And then all the years later, I'm in my late 20s, early 30s, and I read the book, and I say, and something sticks with me about it. And then my mama dies 9 years ago. And this summer, when I knew you were coming here, I went and reread some of your work, and I reread that novel, and I found myself thinking about it again and what Mama said there. And the thing about it is, as I was rereading it this summer, I remember what Mama said 20 years ago. Oh, that book just understood me. And, my mama grew up. My mom was born in the early 1950s in a very rural, isolated part of North Carolina. She grew up in very humble circumstances. She had a difficult life in many ways. And it was one of these things where I'm reading that novel and I'm trying to understand what Mama meant by that. And then I'm thinking about how it was, the book seems really familiar to me. You said it seems like my hometown of Whiteville, right?
Uh-huh.
And it really did. I mean, like walking around, I'm thinking, okay, this does feel like my hometown. It seems so familiar, but it also seems so unfamiliar. Because here I am growing up in the 1980s and 1990s. I recognize this world of Fulton, right? But I recognize it as already old, as already past, right? But I'm seeing this world that I knew now, but I'm seeing it through my mama's eyes. So it was this thing, and I really want your thoughts as an artist on this. Here I was seeing this world that was familiar through unfamiliar eyes. Well, then I asked myself, am I seeing an unfamiliar world through familiar eyes now? And so what I guess I'm wondering is, how do you think literature, how does your storytelling help to make familiar and unfamiliar things engage and interact with one another? And that's a really long background to ask. That's a simple question.
It is, but I think it's as simple as our awareness of one place is many things.
Sure.
To many different people.
Sure.
And there's more than one South.
Absolutely.
And so it's, try as we might to sort of catalog and put people in places in the right slot and call it done. It's impossible. And so for me, I'm often interested in those areas of a place that do hold some kind of mystery or secret that goes against the grain of what might be expected.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love what you said about, there's more than one South. I talk with my students about this, that there is a multiplicity of Souths. And even in South, there's always this polyvocality. There are all these different, the thing that makes the South is the very nature of the many stories told about it. And that all the stories are always in competition with one another. I mean, think about something like the end of Catherine Ann Porter's Old Mortality, where Miranda's hearing Cousin Eva tell her the stories, and then Miranda's trying to say, no, that's not the story of Aunt Amy. And then, the father comes and just all these different stories bouncing off that are, but somehow within that is actually, it's not that the truth is contained within those, is buried beneath those stories. Is that the truth is actually all those stories at the same time, right, in a certain way. And this multiplicity of voices and sounds is something I do see in your work. And it's even, in a different way, there's something about the multiple levels your work operates at. I mean, I look at, you're talking about the humor in your work. There are times where I read your work and there'll be a paragraph that is hilarious. And then a couple lines later, there'll be stuff that is so romantic, even PG podcast, but even right down daggum erotic in moments, right? And you jump from that, you can jump so seamlessly from hilarious to erotic to heartbreaking to all these things at the same time. And I remember I'll start reading one of your novels, or I'll start reading your short stories, and I'll think, this is going to be humorous, this is going to be funny, and it is, but then it feels so tragic as well. And I started thinking, someone asked me to explain your work one time, and I said, it feels to me that she is writing joy-filled tragedies. And I want to know, what do you think the feeling of your work is? What feeling are you trying to express? I mean, joy-filled tragedy is the term that I started using.
Well, I'll take it.
Sure,
I like
sure.
that one. I'm just trying to look at life and a place or a situation from more than one angle.
Sure.
Even when the character doesn't see it that way. I'm interested in seeing the harder parts. And I think it's as simple as, you're a kid in a place and you grow up with other kids in school and you never think about their circumstances.
Absolutely.
or unless somebody brings it up or is making fun of somebody or you're overhearing something like that. But you get down the road and you start thinking of people. And as an older, more mature person, you start to recognize what their lives must have been. The kid acting out in class, the clown, and then you learn what it was like at home. I mean, I'm sort of making up that example. But it's the cause and effect.
Absolutely.
That you're not taking in or questioning as a really young person. And some people, I dare say, probably keep going without doing it at all. But, and taking it at face value. But as a writer, I'm really interested in what leads a person from point A to point B.
Absolutely.
And it's just that simple. And I've told my students, really, if you know what stands to hurt a character more than anything, and you know what that person also loves beyond all else, you've pretty much got all you need.
Sure.
Because those are cards we hold very close to the chest, especially what could just completely damage you.
Yes.
And then you just put a character on a path, and it seems to take care of itself when
Absolutely.
you know these things.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes, superficially, we don't know that. We walk into a room and I say, oh, well, I think I know who he is. I think I know who she is, and you put them in the Rolodex. But if you spend 5 minutes talking to that person, there will be something else to the portrait.
Yeah.
And it may not make everything okay in your mind, and excuse certain behaviors or things. But if it explains, you're a step closer to something much more complicated.
I think so. Yeah, I think that explains a whole lot, and I think it speaks a lot of truth about how, not only how we create and how we read and how we understand, but how we should think of other people as well. I think that's powerful there. It does also bring up something else to me then, as we're kind of winding this conversation down, is you mentioned you see this person over here and you think you know who they are, but you don't. And there are all these things about a person, or let's say even a place, that will surprise you. One thing that I think your work does is that I think someone who doesn't know anything about the South sees one of your novels, picks it up and says, oh, this is going to be, and they say it's about a southern small town. They have this idea of sort of southern quaintness that is going to be there.
Right.
And one thing that your work does, and I presume you're self-conscientious about that, is trying to blow up these ideas of sort of a quaint South means this, right? For instance, one place I do kind of see you, for a Southerner, this isn't surprising at all, but for a non-Southern person, everyone picks up this book and they see, the book opens in a church somewhere, or there's, everybody's going to be religious in here. And yet you're showing this reality about a lot of the South is actually not nearly as religious, or only sort of performatively or sort of outwardly, or it's almost kind of like Christianity is not so much a set of doctrinal adherences so much as it's the old Roman household gods. This is just how we do things. Which I think for a lot of people would rather surprise them, right? Flannery O'Connor has this whole thing. She infamously says the South is Christ haunted. But I don't know, but faith operates in your books, in your work, but it's always sort of peripheral, or always sort of inverted there, right? So how do you think that religion, faith, operates in your work, operates in the South as a cultural force? Because it seems powerful in your work, powerful enough that, when I met you, I'm wanting to ask you, what Baptist church did you grow up in Lumberton, right? It's like I can feel it there, right? So how does this sort of force work, and how is it more complicated than people might want to believe it is?
It's a lot more complicated.
Sure, absolutely.
Because, I mean, I think I said earlier, I really believe in asking a lot of questions. And I don't know where that comes from, but I was a child who had a lot of questions. And I did at Sunday school. And there were some things I just was not willing to say, sure, I believe that.
Mrs. Bailey, if Jesus turned the water into wine, why do we drink grape juice? I literally asked that question to Mrs. Bailey, and she was not very happy with me, right? So.
Well, you know, and somewhere along the lines, I had someone say that anyone born with a child who had problems, that was God's way of punishing the parents. And I just, you know, I had an uncle who I just absolutely adored, who had been, you know, born with, who knows what the diagnosis would be in this day and time. Sure. But he had to spend time in the state hospital, and my grandmother. And so I was just adamant that no, that was not true. And, you know, and I was lucky that I came home from Sunday school and told my parents, and my dad agreed with me and, you know, thought it was a great thing that I had asked questions and had told her what I thought. And so where I chafe is with any person who thinks he or she has the right to say it's this and nothing else. So I'm always looking for, you know, the actions speaking far louder than the words. And I do try to do that on the page.
Yes.
And hopefully in life.
Yes,
you know, I
yes.
think my takeaway from the Baptist church was, I think tithing makes sense, you know.
Sure, absolutely.
I think acts of service make a lot of sense.
Very good.
But anyway, I you know, we could talk about religion
Indeed.
because, you know, but I think I do chafe at any group that is sealed off in a way that is not open to, you know, at least thinking through another point of view.
Last question I'll ask you. What character of all the ones you've created were you the most sad to see go when you wrote the final word for that character story?
Oh, that's hard. I have a third grade school teacher in Life After Life. Because I sort of I thought, what would be my example of the ideal death?
Yes.
And
that's a book about a sort of a hospice facility.
Yes,
and yes.
And so, you know, I always say, I mean, the most inevitable fact of life is that it will end.
Indeed, yes.
But, you know, it's what we don't, is the elephant in the room. And so among all these portraits I was working with, some quite sad and premature, I knew I needed that person who I could easily say, this is a good death. And it's not someone who had lived without hardship. She had, but she had gotten to the other side of it. She had accepted it. She had not let it cause bitterness. And as a third grade school teacher, you know, she's still talking about little so-and-so, you know, who loved to beat the erasers or take out the trash. And she has this whole idea that we're all 8 years old in the heart. And I believe that.
Indeed.
You know, every now and then I give my characters my thoughts. No, I really think, you know, that if we ever forget what it felt like to be a child just on the cusp of asking those questions and taking it all in, then we've really forgotten what it feels like to feel.
Yes.
And so I find myself. So I would say Sadie, and then my other hard character, and it's like picking kids. But in my last novel, I have a little guy named Harvey, and he's in a difficult domestic situation and trying to figure it all out. And he's 8.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people I think the world can be divided between those who outgrew 5th grade humor and those like me who did not. You know? So having Harvey on the page allowed me to like dig up all those bad jokes, you know.
Absolutely.
That kids love to tell.
Absolutely. Yeah, my son every day, he's 6, and he'll just tell me he'll tell me these jokes I think are uproariously funny, and I'm thinking this is high concept humor that is beyond me.
Yeah.
That is beyond me indeed. Well, I love that's what a wonderful way to end with childishness and the harshness and wonderfulness of childishness. I think that's a wonderful place to end the conversation. And Jill McCorkle, we are so glad that you're going to be giving our lecture for us this evening, our 3rd annual Knife Lecture in Southern Literature. And I'm so glad we got to spend some time talking about your work today.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show.
Pleasure.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
That was our Take on the South. Let us know yours. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at U of SC South. Take on the South is produced by Matt Simmons of the Institute for Southern Studies. Special thanks to Professor Dave Garner of the University of South Carolina School of Music for composing our music. Tune in next time for another Take on the South.